right. Welcome back to another episode of Friends from Work Plus here in the Merry Marvel Watching Society, which is never not fun to say. And this is an especially fun one. I mean, I say that. We've had between our Daredevil watches and then the X-Men watch here, I feel like we've been eating pretty well when it comes to older Marvel content. But
what are your top 5 favorite candies? I just popped some M&Ms in my mouth, and I feel like they're kind of underrated.
Yeah.
Like M&Ms were so popular that it became cool to be like, the basic M&Ms are too basic. And now I'm kind of coming full circle to where they're actually kind of good. What do you think?
See, no, I'm a big fan of M&Ms. I would probably go peanut over not, which I know is kind of controversial.
No, peanut butter.
Oh, see, over even that, I would do like the ones with kind of the crunch, or like the pretzel M&Ms. Have you had those?
Those are pretty good.
Those are up there for me. Although this is a thing with Candace and I kind of think that she's right objectively. I'm twisted. I'm broken inside, but I tend to go for kind of like the fruit flavored candies, and she's a big chocolate candy person. So
that's the exact inverse of Annika and I. Annika's obsessed with like Starburst jelly beans. Do you know those? Oh, they are so good though.
Oh, those are great. Those are impossible to stop eating those.
Those are so good. Rest in peace.
So I associate them with just feeling awful because I only ever eat enough to just feel like I can't move.
There's no way to eat just like 5. I eat an entire handful. Annika's always like Starburst, jelly beans, gummy bears, and I'm a big caramel guy. I'm on a huge salted caramel trip. So like I like peanut butter and chocolate. So I'm more of a Reese's, Twix, a dark chocolate.
Twix are great.
Yes. Have you ever had a Take 5?
I actually don't think that I have.
Take 5, a candy that no one talks about, so good.
Man, you know what? I actually, and this kind of fits with the M&M crunches, but the problem with the candy that I'm about to refer to is that it's kind of hit or miss, even just like on a bar by bar basis, because it's like if they're like every now and then you'll get one that's like weirdly like too crunchy or almost stale.
Okay.
And that I think turns people off. But if it is like the right consistency, I actually think a Butterfinger is pretty solid.
Oh, okay. That's a bold take. Because I feel like that's a unique flavor. I happen to like them as well. Let me hit you with 2 of my favorites that I think are somewhat controversial. These are definitely, well, the first one's a movie theater one. Ready? Milk Duds. How does it hit you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You know that. When I visit you in Austin, I feel like I bought
Milk true.
Duds.
Yeah.
Annika is not in. Too much work for her jaw, which I'll say, you can make your jaw very tired by the end of some Milk Duds.
It's true.
And then maybe my favorite, 100 grand. Again, caramel. Thoughts?
Oh, see, I think if I've had that, it was literally probably 20 plus years ago.
Oh, Robby. Okay. I'll see you in Austin and I'll bring some 100 grands with me. Okay. It's just chocolate, caramel, and then these little kind of like the Nestle Crunch things as the top with the caramel.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. Yeah. I can get down with that.
Okay. Anyways, we've been looking forward to doing this episode forever. Rob, here's what I wanted to propose to you as the structure for really the rest of these Foxmen rewatches. We've been doing this, basically, okay? But since I've never seen some of these, what do you think about me always kicking it off with a 30-second gut review of just the entire film and how it hit me? And then we jump into you informing me on all the stuff. Like you read the credits, give me some stuff, and then we can go through it. What do you think about me kicking off every episode with just, here's where I'm at with it?
I love it.
Really?
No, I think that's perfect. Because I am always, like, that's kind of how I'm always coming into this. Just genuinely curious to know what your response was. And I feel like that is probably the case for a lot of folks that are listening. Because you are kind of, again, within our community especially, you are less familiar by far with this franchise than the average viewer.
Correct. Last question
So, yeah.
before we dive in. What is your history with this movie in particular? And I guess in general, how often and recently have you watched the Fox Universe stuff? For me, First Class, I've actually seen maybe 3 or 4 times, which is, I'm thinking maybe the most of any X-Men movie for me.
Yeah, I think that I have seen this one, the first 2 I've seen probably the most for the reasons we discussed, I think, on last episode. I like the first 2 X-Men movies and the first 2 Spider-Man movies were just playing on repeat when I was basically when those first came out, because I was like at prime age. I was like 11.
Sure.
When the Spider-Man 2 and X2 came out, and that's, those movies were kind of made for me. So nothing will get close to those in just sheer numbers of watches, but I would say more recently I've seen First Class because I think there have been a couple times where I was trying to figure out what our inevitable X-Men rewatch would look like even way back before we knew that the universe was for sure coming in during the multiverse saga. And, there were times where I think I tried starting with First Class, which is something that we can maybe talk about here, since the order in which we're watching this is kind of unique. But I also think I watched it ahead of Days of Future Past when that movie hit theaters. Mm-hmm. So there were just kind of a couple times where I wound up watching it. And I also feel like it's one that is kind of on TV sometimes.
Yes, it is. I feel like
I've seen it a decent amount.
I feel like your X-Men fandom parallels my Star Wars fandom. I think the comp in my life is Star Wars, which is I grew up watching Star Wars. I was obsessed. I remember where I was when the prequels came out, and that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. But then when the Marvel Universe kicked into gear, and I've always said this, around 2014, not right when it started, but that's kind of when I fully bought in. And then right around that time / a few years later, Star Wars started putting out some new stuff that was controversial, or people didn't like it, or just in general, the quality waned. And then in turn, my interest kind of shifted. I became more and more obsessed with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and left Star Wars further and further behind. Is that kind of a fair parallel to your X-Men fandom? That as these movies were coming around, you're like, okay, those were cool, but you now were invested other places.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are a couple of things that have kind of, Lord of the Rings is kind of my ride or die, which will surprise nobody, where it's, from the time I saw those and first read the books, those have kind of been the consistent in the background, even if there are times where I've obviously spent a lot more time watching or talking about Marvel stuff.
Right.
But, and then there was a phase where I was pretty invested in the Game of Thrones universe, which maybe would be more surprising to people. But I would say there was one thing that I keep thinking about on this rewatch to your point is in some ways I think the X-Men franchise has kind of the genesis of whatever in me enjoys this podcast. The part of me that enjoys just discussing these things and breaking it down. I remember this very vividly, talking about when you remember where you were when you saw the prequels. My sister, God bless her, who just I made our entire childhoods play all manner of Marvel, whether it was action figures or dress up or whatever. I drug her into it, and she was a good sport. But I think she had seen the first 2 X-Men movies however many times, just because I was always playing them. But then I think I went and saw the third one, which I'm not about to talk about because that's next time. But I went and saw that and she didn't see it. And I just remember like holding her hostage in the car for like an hour. Like we were running some errand or something and like waiting on my mom, and like we literally just couldn't go anywhere. We were in the parking lot and I just like explained the entire plot of that movie.
My nightmare.
and just broke down like what I liked about it, what was like shocking to me. And, you know, of course I was a lot younger. And so I think that in general, I was less critical, but there are things in that movie that were still upsetting to me. So yeah, that's kind of how into the X-Men world I was.
And what year was X3 and what year was First Class-ish?
That's a good question.
Timeline.
So X3 was 2006.
Oh, okay. Still pre-Iron Man.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually kind of interesting if you look at like the years preceding, like the 2 years preceding Iron Man, because 2006 was X3, 2007 was Spider-Man 3, and then 2008 was Iron Man and The Dark Knight. So it was a real like handing of the baton.
Well, those two films are the line in the sand, right? It's kind of pre those two or post those two comic book movies in general.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, like I think that...
but then First Class was 2000.
Yeah, First Class was 2011.
11, okay.
So not as late as...
No, it's not a huge gap.
As I always think. But
yeah.
But I think that there are just some interesting parallels there. Like on the one hand, the degree to which we enjoyed X1 and X2 is all, it doesn't really fit that narrative. You know, like I think we all tend to think that, yes, it is the line in the sand, and it definitely is. And therefore, like we think that really everything that came before those movies, like particularly in the early 2000s, they were just so weak. No. But I think that like that's one side of it. But I also think like on the other side of that line, that's where it starts to get really interesting, because now you have projects reacting to the success of movies like Iron Man and The Dark Knight. And so kind of like in the same way we talk about Spider-Man 3 and X3 having a lot in common, I also think that there are some interesting similarities between X-Men First Class coming out in 2011 and The Amazing Spider-Man coming out in 2012 as their attempts to like reboot and freshen up and modernize to some extent these franchises that had big fan bases, but, you know, people were already at that point getting more like, you know, for me, by the time First Class came out, even then I was already I had jumped ship to the MCU, I would say. And I wasn't even that big of an MCU fan at that point, pre-Avengers.
But First Class already felt peripheral at that point.
Yeah.
Okay,
do you remember, like, did you see this movie in theaters?
That is an excellent question. And I think the answer is yes. And I think only this one. That's what's weird. And I don't know why. I'm trying to go back to 2011 and where would I have been and why would have that been the movie to get me to theaters? You know, I was in college, I guess, probably, depending on what year what time of the year it released. So maybe I just went with college friends. Here's my 30-second review, and then let's get into X-Men First Class.
Yeah.
So I went into the first X1 X-Men from 2000 thinking this is a bad movie. That was just my memory for some reason, really knowing nothing, and it really exceeded my expectations. So just really spur of the moment. I haven't thought of this. I haven't written it down. I would say that was like a 7 out of 10. What did I say? I said, a tier 2 movie, basically.
Yeah.
So like a 68% kind of thing. But I was expecting a 40%. Then with the second one, I had heard it was good, but that even still exceeded my expectations. And I said that would be like a bottom of tier 1 film. So that's like a 85%. And again, expecting like a 65. So really exceeding expectations. Here's the funny thing about First Class. First Class is a good movie. It really is. But I went in expecting, in my memory, an 80%, very, very top of tier 2 type film. And it's not as good as I remember it for whatever reason. And I gave it a fair shake. I watched in a great environment with my wife, and she, without us talking about it, said the same thing, like corroborated my story. And
I forget, had Annika seen this one before?
Yes, she hasn't seen X3 like me. Although, no, hold on. She's never seen X3. I've seen X3 at one point because I remember like a scene, but I cannot tell you anything about it. This movie we both had seen, but for some reason, I think when we started our X-Men kickoff with Days of Future Past 2 summers ago already, if you go back and listen to that episode, I think I referenced like, wow, yeah, they really rejuvenated the franchise with First Class. And Days of Future Past is just a step up in that direction. And so, like I said, I went in expecting this to be an 80 to an 85. And I think I would say it's a good movie, but it's like a 60% in my mind. This would be a middle to middle bottom tier 2 film. Not quite tier 3, but towards the very bottom of tier 2. Like Doctor Strange is a better movie than First Class, I think.
Yeah.
And I think I would have thought it was higher than that. That's my overarching review. And I can give you all the reasons why. I have notes. I have a page of notes, but there you go.
Well, this is so funny. That was a great 30-second review. I agree. My kind of overarching thought here, and then I do want to hear your notes because mine are kind of bigger picture, but it's crazy to me because I think of the narrative that you're referencing and how bought into that we all are, that like they kind of rejuvenated the franchise with this film. It's crazy to me that this is, I think, my least favorite of the 3 that we've watched so far.
I'm really torn on that statement because I do still think there are some things it does really well. And I think some of it is just due to an aging poorly thing. Like, I remember leaving the theater thinking that was pretty sweet at the time. Maybe now I've aged out of it again. Shout out to our MySpace reference a few weeks ago. I don't know. Like, I still think it's a good movie. I just can't tell if I've passed it by or if these concerns were always there and I just wasn't viewing them through this lens. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say if I like this one or X1 more. I should probably start putting together a list though. That'd be kind of fun.
I think it's such an interesting conversation to me, like those movies in particular, because what I kept thinking going through X1 was, and I said this on the episode, how great of a job it did setting up the central premise of this universe. Like the setting up the stakes, the conflict, both between mutants and humans and also between the good mutants and the bad mutants, quote unquote. And this movie makes me think, or I guess I should say this movie reminds me of Solo, which is something I think we talked about recently in another context, where it's like, every time I watch that movie, I actually don't think that there are very many things wrong with that. I think that movie kind of got a bad rap for what it is. But I think that the reason why it got a bad rap is that it's just not a movie that anybody really wanted to be made, because they, like, everything that it fleshes out, actually, I think makes me weirdly, like, not less interested necessarily, but I just don't know that it's additive. Now, the difference I would say with First Class is that whereas, like, I don't think that movie does much to really enhance, say, like, Chewie and Han's relationship, this does, I think, and the reason why I wanted to watch First Class here ahead of The Last Stand is I think that this does deepen what's already the most interesting relationship in the franchise from the first 2 movies, which is Charles and Eric. Yeah, so and I don't want to undersell that because I really do like that piece of this movie, but I think that everything else around it, it just feels like it's kind of it's too much. It's like they take a premise that, again, I thought was fairly simple, and then also like in the first movie, it feels as though people are kind of becoming aware of mutants and that it's a small group. And so it's like I feel like you come away thinking, okay, Eric and Charles were maybe two of like the first, for all we know. And they met each other when they were younger, and then, they had their divides, which is kind of what happened. But it's like going back through and walking through each step, and then the way that they like graft on a lot of other characters that aren't around by the time you get to the new one, it just kind of starts to feel like a prequel in the way that isn't like, it doesn't feel strictly necessary, I guess, to the ongoing story. I'm not trying to be too harsh because it's not like I hate it or anything like that.
I don't know if I would go that far, actually. I don't think I agree with you fully there.
I think that I am lower on the X-Men like prequels, I guess, or however you would want to look at the McAvoy Fassbender stuff than the average person in general. I've found, because I remember Days of Future Past, which a lot of people think is just hands down the best. On our watch, I was kind of more lukewarm on it than I think folks expected me to be. So
right, and I think both of these films, First Class and Days of Future Past, I think they did well in the box office and have pretty good scores. Right? I'm looking it up as you talk.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, I think that's correct.
I agree with what you're saying in general. I just don't know, based off that first opening sentence, that I would go as far as you. Like, I think I enjoyed it more than you did.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
No, for sure. And I think that's a good segue.
86% critic and 87% audience, First Class. Wow.
Yeah.
Movies were just reviewed differently back then, man.
Dude, that's the thing. It's so hard to
But still
put
people
those
for the most
in the
part
correct
liked
context, though.
Yeah, but still.
But yeah. I mean, I think it's just I want to get into the specifics, and so I want to do that by jumping to your notes. The last thing I want to say, kind of talking about the comparison between this and the older films, I notice this sometimes with even some of the older MCU films versus some of the new ones. There's like it's this really delicate balance of like not being so ashamed of the subject matter that you take the fun parts of a superhero movie out of the superhero movie. Like, we've talked about that. And that was a thing that I think a lot of the kind of late 90s, like early 2000s Marvel things did or struggled with. Like, that's one side. But then on the other side, sometimes I feel like once...
You mean like trying to make the X-Men as cool as possible while ignoring the obvious cheese of some of the characters and stuff like that, you mean? Like putting them in all black suits, for example.
Exactly. Like not giving, not putting Wolverine in the Wolverine mask.
Right. And like in the best way, even like with Batman Begins, right? Like approaching a character like Batman with the most possible realism you can come up with.
Yes. That's a great example. Yeah.
Okay. That was kind of the era of that.
And that it's almost like the difference between, like, if you want to make it like really stark, the difference between like the Nolan Batmans, not quality wise necessarily, but just approach wise, and like the Batfleck movies.
Or even like the Nolan Batmans and the Avengers that came out not too long after. Like the Avengers was willing to lean into Captain America's costume and aliens, and is that kind of what you mean too?
Yes, although I would say that Avengers to me is hitting that balance pretty perfectly, which is not to say it's a perfect movie, but
I'm not saying one was good or bad. I'm just saying the difference in the tone of what they're trying to accomplish.
But sometimes because the thing that the Avengers movie did well is it does that stuff, but then it also keeps grounding you in how crazy all of it is for the people experiencing it. Like you have the Tony lines where it's like, okay, like alien invasion, right? And I think that like even the stuff with Cap, like they just, again, it's ridiculous and superhero-y, but they try to do a good job there. Whereas I think like there are more recent Marvel properties, and I think that First Class falls into this category for me too, that are like more comfortable being comic booky, but then sometimes like it gets like a little too, it's like too loose. Like they don't feel the need to like ground it quite enough for my taste.
Yeah.
Where it's like, sometimes I'm like, now it doesn't feel like it's like there's this, it's like one step too far where I'm like, that doesn't feel like something a person would say that was like actually experiencing this kind of crazy thing. Like
that's a really good point.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I think it's one of the beauty. Yeah. Oh my gosh, dude. I haven't thought about that. But for example, I think that's something that works so perfectly for me with something like WandaVision, which is by nature comic booky, goofy, cheesy, far-fetched, but it actually feels grounded and real to me, like the Avengers does. Because of the centering of the characters, the lines, the way they react, the way Darcy reacts to things, the way Jimmy Woo is shocked at it. But you're right. There is something to like First Class where it feels two steps beyond that. I don't even know how to put words to it. You're right. You kind of lose like a tangible effect of what you're watching. It becomes like too nebulous.
Yeah, it's hard to put your finger on because it's so much of a vibe thing. But yeah, it's like, I think that the reason why the MCU has to be more careful about that the longer it goes is just because as the universe gets more and more populated out, and as people are obviously more familiar with just superhuman things, like not even just the world outside your window element that we've discussed before, but even just the, okay, like how comfortable are people going to be with the concept of like, you know, in Multiverse of Madness, for instance, not that I'm even pointing to this as something that was bad, but like there's that scene where he's at the wedding with, and sitting next to Dr. What's his name?
Oh yeah, gosh.
You know who I'm talking about. It's the Michael Stuhlbarg, but he, you know, it's like he's just talking to him very plainly about like what happened with Thanos and like, was it really the only way? And it's like, that's a kind of conversation that you wouldn't probably have had earlier in the MCU or even like early in Marvel movies quite the same way, where you're just kind of having a casual talk about like the purple alien that almost destroyed the world and the choices that you made in response. But I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That you kind of have to, based on the way. But
it works really well there, I think. But
no, exactly. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I just mean like that's like a as you start to get into that, I think you have to be really careful with how you do it. And I think that scene is actually grounded really well in their relationship and in kind of how that was built in the first movie. But it's like, as you start to have that recognition, and I think First Class is like,
it's kind of all of it together too, you know, like the camera angles, the lighting, the costumes, the music, it all kind of plays into the different vibe. I even think about
Yeah.
X1 is a perfect example of what you're talking about, that late 90s, early 2000s thing, in that the only thing we really made fun of aging poorly was, what's his name? Not Beast, the werewolf guy.
Sabretooth.
Sabretooth, like how he kind of looks a little cheesy and his movement's weird. Well, that ages poorly because it really highlights how little that movie tries to do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So much of that film isn't even attempting to have shots like that. That's why those ones stand out.
Yeah.
You're right. So that falls into the late 90s thing of like, let's try to make this as like normal, dark, gritty, not superhero-y as possible. Although we have to admit that we're dealing with a character like Sabretooth. But there is something different with this reboot. Just like I think there is something different with kind of, honestly, a little bit like Iron Man 2, The Amazing Spider-Man, like this era, it is kind of like a reboot, an attempt to shine up and embrace the comic book nature of some of it, and then to varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
And we're 30 minutes into this episode. I haven't even talked about a single thing in the actual movie, but yeah.
No, I know. I guess the more I'm thinking about it, I think the way I would sum it up, maybe, I guess what feels like the most appropriate comparison, and again, this is going to sound offensive, and I don't really mean it from a strict quality standpoint at all, but it kind of does feel like the difference between X1 and X2 and this is like the difference between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and some of the prequels. Again, not quality-wise. I'm not putting this on like a Phantom Menace level or something, but I'm just saying, it's like you go back into the prequels and everything's like, it all looks better. It's like shinier. They're like people have all these force powers that are so different from anything you've seen in the original trilogy, where it kind of started with like it's like in the Millennium Falcon, they're in this kind of junky ship and it feels like this ragtag group. And then you go back and it's like this whole kind of fantasy world building thing that wasn't done as much. And that's kind of what I feel here a bit. Which doesn't, again, that's not even, like I said, that's not a dig. I think that it is just almost different in kind to me. So whenever I'm looking back at this, I kind of have to view it that way, I guess, to try to be fair.
Okay. I think those are all really good points. I think as I go through these notes, that's a great context to keep in mind. I think that the movie is pretty well done. I like it a little more than you, and it seems like you still like it, but not as much as the average fan of these films. You would be lower than the 86%. I would be too. I'd probably be like 68 or something, but it sounds like you'd be 55 or something. Still would watch it. Every note I have is super small, gritty, just dealing with a specific scene. So you ready to just kind of blaze through them and you can react as I say them? The highlight for me is Michael Fassbender as Magneto. Magneto is cool. He's a well-written character. He's complicated. He's a badass. His powers are super cool. I think him actually learning his powers with Charles is a highlight for me. Honing those in, it helps explain some of his strength later on. I like that you get the sequence of him trying to stop the sub the first time and he's not strong enough. I like seeing that kind of vulnerability. His actual origin is brutal, man. And it's legit tough to watch. But I do think it's executed pretty well. And yeah, Magneto's the highlight for me.
I don't even think it's close for me. I think I said this before. The performance fits pretty well with how I view McKellen's take on the character without being like, it doesn't feel like Fassbender's doing an impression of him or anything, but those fit. And McKellen's character is kind of one of my favorite parts of the other films. So it's like, that's all just a like an A+. But also like, man, like the scene when Fassbender shows up in Argentina, and it's like he's so cool and like terrifying, and just like it's everything that you would want a young Magneto to be. Like I really have no notes on the way they wrote the character and the way he executes it.
Mm-hmm. This film, as a lot of prequels do, gets pretty obsessed with little Easter eggs and filling in the gaps of the originals. Things like seeing Hank, the jet, the telepath helmet, the Cerebro reveal, the first build of that Cerebro, the bald jokes that Charles makes before he's bald, the Wolverine cameo.
I love the Wolverine cameo, though.
Yep, that's a highlight for me. I go back and forth on how much of that is a win. Like, is it too much at times? I did get excited to see the first jet. I thought the building of Cerebro was a cool idea. Like, did you catch like the Agent Stryker shout out, which he's one of the politicians, like his father, I guess, or something?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know. I thought that stuff was pretty cool. It might be over the top at times.
Just talking about the prequel side of this, and this is something that we'll kind of have to make sense of and trace as we move forward, but it is part of why I wanted to slip it in here. This was intended to be, I think, like The Amazing Spider-Man originally, in that I don't think that these were supposed to actually be the same versions of Charles and Eric that we got in the original until Bryan Singer came back with Days of Future Past. Bryan Singer, by the way, was also, he has the story credit for this movie and was a producer on it. And then I think Matthew Vaughn was a producer on Days of Future Past. So that, this was kind of they were both involved in these, but I think that was the, like they had done in release order, The Last Stand, which was not received well, and then X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was not received well. And then this was the next one. And I think that at that point, which is probably why it was kind of already on the periphery for me, I think a lot of people felt like the franchise was just dead and they needed to just totally scrap it. But then I think, with Days of Future Past, they like firmly rooted them in the same timeline, which, again, it's already like that. We've talked about that before. Like Bryan Singer is so weirdly unconcerned with continuity because, obviously you have Hugh Jackman, but it's like, is that supposed to be actually, like the Wolverine we know, or is that just a fun cameo?
Right.
And you have things that like where they kind of line up, but then also there are things that clearly contradict that we can talk about at the end of the episode. But just as we are talking about the prequel side of it, I think that it's worth mentioning that some of those contradictions are maybe a little bit more forgivable in light of the fact that they weren't, strictly speaking, trying to do a prequel. But at any rate, that's what it became. So we still kind of have to look at it in that sense.
My next two takes are two potentially hot takes. I have no idea how you're going to respond to this, okay? I think Kevin Bacon does a pretty good job playing an intimidating creep.
Oh, I totally agree. I had the same thought.
That's not a hot take.
Yeah. No, I mean, it may be outside of this conversation, but I feel like that is, in some ways, I would say that that's my favorite performance outside of Fassbender's here, probably tied with McAvoy, but
that's the beauty of me knowing nothing of this franchise and knowing nothing of the cultural reaction at the time. Like when I say that right there, that is as genuine as it gets, because I have no idea if right now everyone on our Discord is going, oh my gosh, he thought Kevin Bacon was good. What an idiot. Or if they're like, yes, I'm glad someone pointed it out. I have no idea. But to me, just watching the film, yeah, I thought he turns in a good performance. Hey, my power's back on in my hotel. I've been powerless this whole time, recording this on battery. To me,
nice.
I feel like he turns in a good performance, and he is pretty intimidating, and the character, for the most part, is pretty creepy, like a pretty good villain.
I particularly like his German iteration. It's just like extra kind of hammy and villainy, but I think it works really well. Not, I like that he doesn't stay there. I think it would have been weird if he didn't move into like the version of Sebastian Shaw we get for the rest of the movie.
Right.
But I kind of like that. I like seeing that he's kind of a malleable figure through that too.
I forgot how much of Magneto's origin is from World War II Nazi Germany. Here's my second hot take. Henry Jackman is a friend of the pod. He gave us one of the coolest interviews we've ever done. It's still on YouTube. We wanted to talk to him for 15 to 20 minutes about some of his work on Civil War and Falcon and Winter Soldier and all that stuff. And it turned into an hour and 10 minutes where he took the computer into his studio and actually played us stuff on piano while we were talking to him. Genuinely felt like he was having a good time. And so that is always going to be a treasured interview. He has a special place in the Friends from Work community. That being said, I just don't think I'm a huge fan of what he does here. And in general, I've not been overly impressed with some of the other work outside of things like Civil War and Winter Soldier. And it's funny because I think two things. One, I think he almost rips his Falcon and Winter Soldier theme directly from this. I mean, it's almost identical. Go back and listen to it right now. Almost identical. The same kind of progression. Even my wife caught it. And I do think making such a firm anthem, which is so funny, Rob, because we always talk about that in the music front, like how often should these characters have recognizable, singable anthems versus just kind of a generic soundtrack. And the balance is, you know, we talk all those interviews we have with those composers, like John Pizzano recently talks about the balance you have to find there. And I think by giving the X-Men such a distinguishable theme and anthem, every time they kind of do something good, he hits that same theme. I think this is an example of it's maybe a little bit too much to where now it falls into what we talked about kicking off this episode. It kind of contributes to the slight embracing of the cheese that you just didn't have 11 years prior.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. And that's funny because it like I think in some ways the original X-Men theme from the first two films would seem to have kind of more of a cheese factor.
But here's the thing. They don't hit it as much in the movie. I'm not talking about listening on Spotify. I'm talking about in the first movie, every time Wolverine does something, they don't just hit you with it. Right? Like, there's a balance there, right? We talk about No Way Home and seeing Doctor Strange in No Way Home and giving a little dun, 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 dun. But you don't want to do it too much, right? And then you see Tobey Maguire and you got to hit the ba, dun, 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 but you don't want to hit it too much. And could we have used it a little more? And so there's always a balance. This is the other extreme of every time the X-Men do something good, it's a loud, audible, upfront theme.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. I mean, it's telling that Days of Future Past brings back the composer from X2, and I think Ottman sticks around for the I think at least Apocalypse. So yeah, this is Jackman's only turn within this franchise.
It's like if I was directing one of these comic book films, any of them from 2000 to 2024, I would want to be really careful at how many times I get a shot of my heroes in a physical line staring in the distance and hitting the music. And I think that can be, it can be doable. The best version ever is Portals, right? If you build up to it and you earn the right from your audience, you can do it in the most impactful way ever. And oh my gosh, can it move people. But you got to be careful that each fight doesn't end with a shot of like the Eternals on the cliff, all in a perfect line, hitting the theme to where it's like, is that grounding? Like, would they naturally have been standing that way?
Right.
And this movie has a little bit of that. Like, we just accomplished something quick. Everyone look into the distance, play the theme. And I would just tone it down a little bit, is my point. That's not even really Henry's fault, maybe.
No, but I think there is a combo there. You're right.
Because, like, to me, the training montage that follows these notes is full on cheese, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's one of the weirdest parts of the movie, correct? Am I crazy? Is that a hot take? Like the multi-view edits with all the cameras crisscrossing and the music and the running.
I feel like they're trying to do like comic book panels. But
it kind of comes out of nowhere. Like we haven't had that yet.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels weird. I mean, that's the thing. I'm always so mixed on Matthew Vaughn as a director because, like, have you seen the Kingsman movies?
Yep.
Like, I've only seen the first one. I really enjoyed it, like, for what it is. Like, it's kind of like, you know, he is...
It's supposed to be, like, tongue-in-cheek, goofy, right? Like, a little bit of, like, Kill Bill vibe, almost.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, he does, like... He's a great director for comic book movies, and that he clearly enjoys the subject matter. He's done like
Argyle looks to be that way too, kind of.
Yeah. I think he did Kick-Ass. I wanted to say he was involved with Wanted, another McAvoy movie on some level.
Oh, Angelina Jolie, Curve the Bullets. Yeah. But you know, in general, that's not totally my scene, to be honest. Like all those
and that's what I was
named
say,
are not really my thing.
No, like I thought the Kingsman was fun. I've only seen it once, you know, which is like for me saying something. It's just like I like his, like, I'm generally not bored watching his movies. I would even say like I like a lot of his movies that I've seen, maybe even slightly more than this one, but I do think that like what they all have in common is like it's that weird line between like knowing camp and cheese, and it is probably just totally a subjective thing where other people watch this stuff and it's like perfectly superhero comic booky. But for me, it's like that is that scene you just highlighted, the training montage, is kind of like in a nutshell the problem that I have with this movie. Which is not to say that this entire movie is like that.
No, totally.
The things that I don't like are kind of summed up by that scene.
Well, that's perfect because I'm going to share like 3 more things that bother me, but I really feel like the last third of this movie actually really helps save the movie. I think it really gets pretty good to finish. The other thing that caught my eye is there are quite a few CGI moments that age poorly. And it again just makes me think about how 11 years earlier in X1, there aren't that many, but I think it's because they're not trying to. But the Banshee kid flying looks really bad. And it just kind of reiterates what I've always said on this podcast, which is I think the up-close shots of a character flying are so hard to do, CGI-wise. Even as recent as Black Widow, flying through the sky, it's really hard to do, even in 2022. So a lot of movies tend to avoid that. But the follow-up comment I have then is, holy balls, with this being the context then, you have to give props to the team for Iron Man. Because in 2008, they literally, to this day, still, it's almost perfect. You know, the suit-up scene occasionally looks a little goofy, but like they mastered flying, you know, through the sky against jets to look so real in 2008. So I don't have like a ton of grace for it getting worse here, if that makes sense. Like Jon Favreau really did have an eye for nailing that side of it, and it should be applauded because it still holds up so well. I mean, the shot of Iron Man blowing up that tank and the famous explosion still looks as good as anything, bro. It really does.
Well, and not just the, like, you know, I think you talked about in the Marvels some of the the stuff with Monica flying and
Exactly.
flying and or falling. And it's like, yeah, not only did the scenes where he's next to the jet look good, but also the scenes where he like gets, has the icing problem and is kind of falling and plummeting. Like that looks great. Still,
and their
to my eye,
genius call to get that camera angle of Tony's face so they can do the CGI'd from afar Iron Man, but then to always give us that personal shot of Tony looking forward with the computer screen and getting to get his reactions still was such a genius call. What a perfect way to pull that off. But anyways, the CGI is not perfect here, and that also plays into kind of the same vibe you're discussing, in my opinion, with like the training montage. Like it's just a little bit cheesy. And then I think we hinted at this. I don't love Jennifer Lawrence's performance here. I don't like Mystique that much as a character. I think it's too moody and angsty. We're leaning too much into the teenage drama, like Twilight feel, kind of, where like what's so weird to me is she connects with Hank on this level of we don't fit in and we don't look normal and we gotta change to adapt. And they're both like, yeah, let's do that. And then pretty quickly, Hank comes up with the serum and then she gets really mad at Hank. How dare you do that? And why would you change yourself? And you can't do it. When I'm kind of like, weren't you the one that commissioned it in the first place 20 minutes ago? There's just too much kind of moody, angsty stuff around her. And it takes some of the mystique away from the character.
No, that's exactly how I felt kind of with the knowledge of this. Whenever you do go back and watch the first two movies with Rebecca Romijn, it
showing up naked to Charles real quick and is like, what, you can't deal with this? Kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. Here's my, and it's part of why I isolate that training montage. I guess my hot take here would be remove every X-Men or every X-Man from this movie except for Xavier and Magneto and maybe Beast. And I think it's a better movie. I don't think that you need like one of the strange things is I think this movie was birthed out of the original plan, which was to take the characters that people had known from the original trilogy and then go back and do character by character origin films, which is why it's X-Men Origins Wolverine, because there was also going to be X-Men Origins Magneto. And that was a movie that was at one point greenlit. And then I think because Wolverine was such a bomb that they just wound up reworking and kind of combining that with this. But I just keep thinking like, man, there's a gem of something in there where like the thing, like the Charles Eric stuff works so well and it's so interesting that really anytime we're doing anything else, I'm kind of just annoyed that we're like, I'm never happy to be in a scene with Havoc or with Mystique or with Banshee or
the
with
kids learning their powers and having like the party. Yeah.
And the whole scene where they're like coming up with their names is so cringy to me.
That's Catwoman, by the way, from the new Batman. Angel.
Oh, yes, true. Yeah. Zoe Kravitz.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
I think I agree with everything you're saying to a slightly lesser extent, right? Like I agree, but if you feel it like a 9 out of 10, I feel it like a 6 out of 10, but I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just, I don't like that. That's one thing that like, for instance, just as a, talking about like, that's something that we've never really gotten in the MCU. The only time we've ever gotten anything like that is like in the Marvels when it's played as a joke. Like when Miss Marvel is trying to name Monica and it's like, and that's
correct.
done. I love that, but it's like within the X-Men universe, like contrast this to X-Men 1.
They're doing it sincerely.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, I actually kind of like as much as I don't want those movies to go so hard into like to be ashamed of the source material, but I think that the scene where Wolverine is poking fun at like, oh, and what are your wheels? Like that's because it is kind of a goofy thing to have code names in a world where like there aren't quote unquote superheroes. And I do think that you have to find ways to, it's like in the MCU, just like the original Avengers, it makes sense. Like Hawkeye is like, that is like an agent code name. It makes sense that Black Widow is that because she was a Black Widow. Iron Man gets his name from what reporters call him in the press. Captain America makes sense in the context of his origin. And then Thor, it's just his name. And so it's like, there's never a moment where someone's like,
they have to
you know
come
what
up
you
with
should
a code
be?
name. Yeah.
You should be Iron Man.
Which is why it works so well in the Marvels, yes, with that kind of wink and nod by dancing around it.
But here, like that whole like, because it's also like they just think of all of the like they think of all their comic book names on the spot too, in a way that just feels like man, I feel like if this is like the name you're going to go by, also like you did not put very much thought into it. Like you gave it like a full 3 seconds. And my final thing with the like younger X-Men, this is something that you've always brought up whenever you've got the character that's just being like so ridiculously mean. Like, why is Havoc bullying Beast so intensely this entire movie?
Yeah, as if they're not all quote unquote freaks. He's the only one that gets made fun of. It's very strange. On that note, too, can I ask you something? Because you said that you never saw a ton of Charles and James McAvoy's performance. And my wife, Annika, got finished with this film, and she turned to me and said, man, Charles is just really mean in this movie to certain people. Like, why did they write him to say some kind of cutting things to Mystique? Like when he's like, yeah, you are pretty ugly. He says something like that. Like, you need to put clothes, like you're hideous. You should change. He hints that with her like 7 or 8 times. And they kind of make him a womanizer early on. It doesn't really bother me, but is that all normal to you? Because that's obviously not the Charles you get, who's so empathetic by the time you meet him as Patrick Stewart. And maybe they're trying to show the character growth he has there. So I'm not against it, but how did you take any of that stuff? Like the weird lines to Mystique and some of the womanizing stuff and the drinking.
See, I think it's a weird call because in the comics, you certainly like I would say that Patrick Stewart's take on Xavier is that version of the character is much more kind of wholeheartedly good. I would say even in the original comics, like he's more of a like he can definitely be kind of a jerk sometimes, but more in like a Doctor Strange kind of a way. Like this like
see, because Patrick Stewart has almost more of a Captain America sincerity to him.
Right.
It'd be like if you rolled back the origin of Captain America and he was actually a D-canoe.
No, it's like I would say, and it's probably 80% that still in the comics that like Xavier's, because the whole idea is he's the idealist, but it's just that there are also times where he's like he can be really harsh as a like, especially whenever the X-Men are younger, and he's kind of the teacher / father figure / like coach team leader, where it's like he'll just push them really hard. And that's normally where you see that stuff. But that's why I say it's kind of a weird call where we get him just being like kind of cutting. Like that's not Xavier.
Specifically to Mystique.
Yeah.
I can't remember the lines. I didn't write them down, but he cuts her down a few times.
And just like the like it's kind of funny the like, oh, it's a very groovy mutation thing, but it just doesn't really like, I just don't find the character very charming, I guess. And it seems like I'm supposed to.
Yeah. No Way Home is on in the background while I'm doing this. And I just got to the part. Andrew Garfield says, what about you? You going dressed as a youth pastor? A cool youth pastor? I love that line so much. And then he shows him his suit and it's so cool. Oh gosh. Okay. it sounds like we really didn't like this movie. I'm going to close us here in 5 minutes time. I can share a few notes that I absolutely love towards the end of this film. I think that the CIA agent that is on their side, that girl, and I'm blanking on her name, she does a really good job. I think she has an interesting role, and I think she acts it well, and I'm into that side of the story. And I'm blanking on her name, the agent who helps them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Moira?
Moira? I think that the entire conception of the warship battle is pretty cool. To go back into history and implement the X-Men being involved there, the do not cross the line. I buy the dread from both sides. I buy the way Kevin Bacon manipulates the situation to make them do stuff they don't want to do. I love Charles jumping into the Russian soldier's mind and shooting down their own ship to save the day so that the Americans don't fire on them. I buy then, after the whole skirmish, both sides shooting at the beach. Like, I feel like that sadly feels realistic. Of like, hey, we can just take this out right now real quick. And then Eric turning all the missiles around is so cool to me. While he's stopping the missiles, the disagreement on the beach really works for me. I think that a couple lines there are spectacular. One plot device that always is going to get me, it's undefeated, is whenever a character takes unnecessary death or pain because of something that feels like it could have been so frivolously avoided. And often it's the character you just least want to die. I won't say a movie I'm thinking of right now because it'll spoil something for you. But that'll always get me. And the line when Charles says, "I can't feel my legs," is an all-time sad moment for me. For whatever reason, the connection of how that's how Charles becomes paralyzed and just his performance there gets me every time. I can't feel my legs. I can't feel my legs.
Yeah.
And it feels so unnecessary. Like, and Magneto feels that. Like, Magneto stops the whole battle to go to Charles's side. And it's like, man, we didn't have to do this, but you understand why. Like, it doesn't feel frivolous. And yet it could have been so easily avoided. That will always get me. So that ending for me is so good.
That's the moment. Like, and to me, again, it's more in Fassbender's reaction to it, because
immediately I dropping his whole mission.
It's so nuanced, like, because he goes, I mean, he's holding him in this very kind of intimate way, and then while he's doing that, then
and Charles says,
like,
"No, you did it for yourself."
And he's like, "It's not her fault, it's yours." Like,
yes.
It's so brutal. But then I even noticed, like, this is what I love about their relationship, and why, again, I think I'm glad that we're watching it now. I'm curious to see how you kind of feel like it works moving into the third film. But it's like, even after he says that, Eric doesn't...
He doesn't want Charles to die or be hurt.
Like, yeah, but he's not, like, he still holds him and then waits for, I think, Moira to come over, and he, like, hands Charles off to her so she can support him. And then he steps away and is like, "Whoever wants to come with me." But I noticed just like the subtlety of that moment where it's like, even whenever Charles is kind of like giving him a really cold dose of reality and saying, "Hey, this is like, you did this to me." I think that he's still not like a bad guy in how he responds to that. Like, he's still like, okay, like, I'm going to take that and just kind of walk away, but I'm still going to make sure that, like, this, my friend, is okay. And it's just, man, I think that's that you're right. That ending, that whole scene, I think that sets up that conflict in their relationship really, really well.
Yeah, and the fact that a human is the one that shot at Eric to stop him. Granted, she needed to. She's not unjustified, but it is a human then that hits Charles. My note is incredible last beach scene. It really does make up for a lot of the errors early on. And like also Eric getting that helmet on the first time and the way he kills Kevin Bacon's character with the coin, that all works for me. It's so badass to me. And the helmet being invented, just...
Oh, yeah.
So I think for me, I would probably go thus far X2, X-Men First Class, X1. I'd probably say X2 is bottom of tier 1. So I'm going to say X2 is 85. I'm going to say X-Men First Class is 72 and X1 would be 70, like right there, probably. Something like that.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about those two though.
Yeah, see, it's so hard because it's all about like the expectations you bring into it. But there were so many moments with First Class that I had issues with, even if they're little ones. And there were surprisingly few of those for me in X-Men. So I think that's why I kind of have to rank them the way that I do at this point. But I do want to, as we're on our way out, a couple of things that I've noticed reading up on these movies and kind of the reboot here that I think we should just give a shout out. I think that Matthew Vaughn's intention with writing Xavier the way he was to show that we met him at a point where he is this like very empathetic, mature person, but that the interesting thing is meeting him at a point before that and showing that there is a difference. And so what you were saying earlier about the opportunity for growth, McAvoy even has compared it to like great civil rights leaders, which is really kind of what Professor X is supposed to be within the mutant context, but meeting them like before they were the leaders that we know, and
Sure.
kind of how they've stood, like. So I think that's part of like they're digging into him being someone that's driven by ego and kind of a womanizer, and then how he's by the end of the movie kind of figuring out what his role looks like. On the flip side, I thought what was interesting, since we've kind of talked some about Star Wars on this episode, I think it was just last year. I think it was an interview for The Killer with Fassbender, but he was talking about this role as they were filming this. The way that he viewed it was Magneto was the misunderstood outsider that just like always needs, like he doesn't ever feel like he belongs, and so whenever like Charles kind of starts to pull him in a bit, like that's so meaningful to him, but then also he's obviously so on guard. But I think that the way that that's actually visualized kind of within that Star Wars context, or executed, I should say, is Matthew Vaughn saw it where Charles was like an Obi-Wan Kenobi and Lyncher is supposed to be Han Solo, in that kind of like, he's jaded, he's cynical. And I do think that shows through. I think the problem is with that conceit, I'm not sure that the Xavier figure, I just don't know that character's fleshed out enough on his side to really show the contrast. Like, I think if we didn't have the context of the original X-Men movies doing some of that work, I think that there are a couple of things in this movie that wouldn't actually make as much sense. And that's fine, because the reality is we did have those movies. But at any rate, I think that it's funny that we started this conversation talking some about Star Wars, and that was one of the last points that I had to make, because I like that way of looking at it.
I buy that a little bit. Every time Eric is about to fully buy into the X-Men, he runs away, or even in that interrogation sequence when he's not supposed to go in, he's like, I'm still going to go in, but he's mostly doing the right stuff, but then he kind of gets pulled out. I get that.
Man, you know what? One scene that I should say I hate being negative, but I also I thought January Jones in this movie is really not clicked in with Emma Frost. Yikes.
You hate this.
Yikes.
I don't feel that way as much. Wow. I don't feel that way as much.
Here's what's funny. I was watching this maybe, I think I watched this in like two sittings, and one of them Candace was home for and walked by, And it was a January Jones scene, I think. But Candace was like, wow, the acting in this movie is not very good. And I was not even like in that moment in a position to really debate. Like whatever, I think it was one of these scenes like between her and like I don't think it was Kevin Bacon. It maybe would have been the scene where she's talking to Charles and Eric. But all that aside, the negative aside, one thing that I really do love on the Fassbender side of that is man, the fact that they've established that her diamond form, she's kind of invulnerable, you think, but then him like wrapping the whatever around her neck and like you seeing the cracks in that is super intense. And I really do like that because that's a great way of showing like it's not like he's betraying his team or something.
Yeah.
But he's like clearly
he's
got
willing
like
to go
a
further.
really, yeah, there's this mean streak. There's like a real like brutality within him. And so I do think
because of his really well told origin story, which is traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so Robby likes Michael Fassbender and he hates everything else. So that is our summary of X-Men First Class. Thanks for tuning in. What is next, Robby? X3 now, finally, right? For my first time ever?
Yes.
Or kind of first time ever?
Yeah, which, you know, I want to say to kind of prepare us for that, it is like there is some clunkiness to this whole franchise because of the weird continuity stuff. There's an argument to be made. And I think because of what I said earlier about the way this was initially conceived, some people view this almost as a different timeline, to kind of look in multiverse terms that just kind of merge within Days of Future Past. I just don't think that that's really what I think Days of Future Past makes explicit that this is supposed to be like the younger version of the people that we meet there. And so I think that given that, if you watch the original trilogy and, essentially watch the series in release order, I think it just kind of, when you come back to First Class, it feels a little confusing as to what it is that it's trying to do. But my hope is that splicing it in here between X2 and X3, one, kind of gives us a second to let the events of that movie like sit and resonate. But then I think it also hopefully does the kind of like machete cut thing with Star Wars where it's like you end Empire and then you go back and you get all of the, now that you know about Vader, get the backstory on Anakin. I kind of think that in the same way that like X2 ends with, I think, a really good kind of table setting, Magneto's out again. You're seeing like he's taking Pyro and the sides are lining up and you're seeing like you've gotten enough background from the characters that I think it's nice to step away and get more of the context from that relationship. And so then we'll kind of come back into X3 with, the opening of that movie will kind of be another flashback of sorts that, we'll talk about this next week, may or may not clash with certain elements of this movie, but I think it'll set us up well to then kind of see how that relationship runs its course in the original trilogy, and then from there we'll kind of be moving into the next phase of this that will culminate with Days of Future Past.
So far, the first three movies have been pretty good. And I think there's going to be a middle phase where we start wondering a little bit what's going on. And so we're getting there at some point.
That I will say everything after Days of Future Past, I don't think I've seen. With the exception of like all the way through. Like obviously Logan, I have not seen Apocalypse all the way through. I think I put it on once.
Oh man. Okay. Well then we have a journey for you.
Same with Dark Phoenix. I those are like the two that I started and just kind of had a hard time with.
Let's just say you understand why Oscar Isaac soured on comic book movies. No doubt. All right. Thanks for
Yeah.
listening. This journey has been so much fun. Can't wait to get into more of it. Hope you guys are enjoying it too. If you've never seen the films, we invite you to watch along with us. It's going to be a really fun journey, all in preparation for the X-Men entering the MCU. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you right back here on Friends from Work Plus.